I just got word from the machinery here that this meeting is being recorded. My name is Farrell Boyce. You'll be hearing from me at length later. Our first order of business is a First Nations welcome by Tiffany Joseph from Saanich Nation. Leave this to Tiffany, and I have some more words of introduction with Tiffany later on in the program. So Tiffany, we're looking forward to your introduction.
Eit tengen hela chlaswit yn ysnet. Cocotamat yn y tîn. Ciamt yn y main. Sgwych al y chapla iag. Schaнаnos diet sgwyd simultucht. Tyn y solsila la. Ysdywat te iad Nikelos iad asnitat yn yna. Jietyn de elanganokta. Ni llet Saanich elanganok. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tiffany Joseph. My SENÇOÞEN name is Cholossalwit. And just want to thank you all for coming to this online gathering. And we're all situated here in Saanich territory. The Saanich people we are the saltwater people and the emerging people. And our name for the saltwater people comes from the fact that our territory is all within what we call the Salish Sea at this time. The Southern Gulf Islands, Southern Vancouver Island, San Juan Islands, and we had villages on the mainland of so-called BC and Washington. And to travel to these lands, we traveled through the sea by our canoes. And when we use the word elanganuk, it more literally translates to home place, which is what resonates more with me when I think about who we are, because we probably spent just as much time out on the water as we did on land as Saanich peoples, fishing and crabbing, and just visiting one another. Took a lot of paddling time. So, and for emerging people, that comes from the time our territory was flooded. And those floodwaters came, and then when they were receding, the leaders of those times said, Saanich, look what's emerging. And all the different lands they could see from SENÇOÞEN Mountain, which you might know in English as John Dean Park, but you will see our name on there, SENÇOÞEN. And when they were looking from SENÇOÞEN at the lands that they could see, that was our home. And that was the place that was reborn after those floodwaters receded. So wanted to share that history to help ground us in these discussions we're having today. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'll hand it over to Farrell.
Thank you, Tiffany. A beautiful description of life that you enjoyed in the past, and I think you still participated to some degree now, and that's a good thing. Can't let this day pass without commenting on what I would call the deep tragedy and foolishness of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think the person who has engineered that and has very persistently over a long period of time, Mr. Putin, is very much mistaken. It'll be a long time before this terrible error is corrected. We wish both the Russians and the Ukrainian people to find the wisdom to recover from this assault. But it can't let that deflect us from being who we are and the duties we have to this home we share. Thank you. I was born in Vancouver in BC in the summer of 1939. You can do your own computations. I began a 30-year professional career in the spring of 1968 as a physical limnologist. I'm in brackets, that's a landlocked oceanographer, at a federal research institute called the Canada Centre for Inland Waters in Burlington, Ontario. And the institute was established in order to put Canada on a more even footing with the United States regarding care of the transboundary waters that we shared. In addition to my scientific career, I became active as an environmental advocate. I wrote for the local newspaper. I helped to organize art shows and concerts. In 1992, I organized a project with the Hamilton, Ontario Unitarian Church, the Hamilton Naturalist Club, and the Hamilton Foundation to mount the Eco City Project. Public workshops on a bioregional view of Hamilton and Burlington. Does that sound a little familiar? My experience as an environmental activist taught me that energizing someone around environmental issues depended on not only on scientific persuasion, but also on that person's enjoyment of local nature, feeling part of a supportive and environmentally aware community. And dare I say, being at times in the presence of something greater than simple calendar-worthy beauty. And it's this elusive quality that interests me. Legends, pictures, poetry, and songs, regardless of their age, completeness, or rationality, can speak to this beauty. The Garden of Eden story, for example, has retained its poignancy for thousands of years. Some of you may know a version of the Eden story in Gene Ritchie's excellent song, In the Cool of the Day. And it's a beautiful song. I'd love to sing it. There are other powerful stories that relate to the very place we live in, stories that many of us don't know. This webinar is part of a series of public events sponsored by Friends of Shoal Harbour. The series is entitled Living on the Saanich Peninsula as If It Were Home. This is borrowed from Tim Lilburn's book of the title Living in the World as If It Were Home. This phrase is a teaser because it calls for a version of home that is more than wood and windows, but does not define it. I'll let this hang for now, and I ask you to think on your personal definition of home, while encouraging you to share it during the discussion period, or perhaps to post it in the chat box, or even better, email it to us along with your other thoughts about this presentation. You can find the email address for this communication on our website, www.shoalharbor.com. I think you can remember that one, www.shoalharbor.com, as being easier than remembering the actual email address. The concerns that animate Friends of Shoal Harbour and other similar environmental groups, many of whom participate in the Saanich Peninsula Environmental Coalition, are of a more utilitarian nature, but nevertheless, they point in the direction of harmony between people and their surrounding nature that is part of their home. What I understand of First Nations traditional knowledge and culture is its value as a complementary view of our surroundings. It's a view that supports the idea that our surroundings are an essential part of our home and indeed part of ourselves. Isolated from the world, we would be greatly diminished. The Mi'kmaq First Nations in New Brunswick have a concept of two-eyed seeing, and that's the ability to hold more than one idea in mind at a time. And this reveals the equivalence of traditional First Nations idea and those of Western science in some situations. For example, blue ecology, a collaborative concept where Western science and Indigenous knowledge are brought together. This has become part of the United Nations water policy. We should encourage two-eyed seeing. Given the deeply troubling history of colonization, it's our turn to listen to First Nations people, and in particular to ask them about their concept of home. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, the Reverend Shana Lynngood. Shana is co-minister of the First Unitarian Church of Victoria, opposite the Red Barn on West Saanich Road. The Unitarian Church was not well established in Canada until the 1940s and would have been too outside the conventional denomination to have been considered as a sponsor for a residential school. The Unitarian Church's non-participation in the residential schools does not diminish its efforts to encourage reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. We have Reverend Shana to tell it like she sees it, but also to reflect on the role of houses of worship today. Shana, welcome.
Thank you, Farrell, and thank you, Tiffany, for your words about the people of the saltwater and the emerging people. What a vision. What could we be emerging into together? So my comments this evening begin really by thinking about the power of place, which is, I think, a big piece of what Farrell was just saying, and a bit of what Tiffany's welcome to all of us reminds us of, is the power of place. Because we have all been shaped by places. And when I say shaped by places, I don't mean simply nourished and supported and sustained by the food and the water of those places, by the land, but by the place itself. There is a power to places. We all know that. We've all had moments in our lives when we've walked out into a field or when we've stood on a beach and we've just felt the power of that place, and we've known it in our bones. We know who we are. We feel a sense of interconnectedness. We see how we fit into the larger whole of life with a capital L when we put our one small being in conversation with the whole that we fit into. Place shapes and forms our understanding of what it means to be alive, of what it means to be human, of what it means to exist in the midst of all other existence. It's a bit like a cosmic version of having a sense of a hometown, much like Farrell was just saying, a sense of home, but it's in a much bigger, broader cosmic sense of hometown. So how can we envision a bond or a tie between humanity and the earth that is healthy, dare I say, generative, that is humble, that is grateful? A book that has been informing me a lot lately is the book Braiding Sweetgrass: Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer, an Ishkanabe Indigenous person, in which she talks about the difference between the Indigenous creation story of Sky Woman and of the formation of Turtle Island, and the Judeo-Christian story to which Farrell referred, the Garden of Eden. In Wall Kimmerer's book, she writes the following: on one side of the world were people whose relationship with the living world was shaped by Sky Woman, who created a garden for the well-being of all. On the other side was another woman with a garden and a tree. But for tasting the fruit, she was banished from the garden, and the gates were clanged shut behind her. In order to eat, she was instructed to subdue the wilderness into which she was cast. Same species, same earth, different stories. Like creation stories everywhere, cosmologies are a source of identity and orientation to the world. They tell us who we are. One story leads to the generous embrace of the living world, the other to banishment. End quote. our vision of the world and our place in it, or a concept of what role our life should have on Earth, is a critical ingredient in shifting the way that we relate to this planet. The more I thought about my sense of home, a sense of Earth, a sense of naturehood, the more I thought about how we are all, each of us, drawn to saving that which we love. The more we see the natural world as more than the set upon which our lives unfold, as more than the backdrop for all that we do, the more likely we will be in a way to be, more likely we will be in a way that cares for this fragile and rapidly deteriorating planet. We care for, we are drawn to saving what we love. If we can come to see Earth as more than even our home, to see it as creation, to see it as life that exists not for us, but alongside us, equally as worthy of health and wellness as we are, then we might change course and avert disaster. So I've been wondering about that lately. Can we love the Earth and all its creatures more than we do now? Can we see all life as inextricably intertwined with ours? Can we become less individualistic, less human-centric, drawn to love and care for that which cares for us so well? I remembered that when my kids were little, we used to read this book called When Sophie Gets Angry, really, really angry. And in the midst of this children's book, Sophie storms out of her family's home, irate with her sister. And she's running through the forest and she looks angry and she's sobbing. And finally, as she runs, she gets more and more calm. She notices the squirrels, the chipmunks, the birds. She climbs a tree and she looks out, and the biggest picture in the whole book says, "The wide world comforts her." And every time I get to that page, I think, the world has done that for me so many times. How do I say thank you for all the times it has comforted me? Often in the midst of uncertainty or worry or sadness or anger, I will turn to the earth, to the birds, to the sea, to the mountains, for comfort, and even for just a bit, just for a moment, a sense that things might turn out okay. Really, what I go there for is for a glimpse of the eternal, a glimpse of something that will continue on regardless of what is happening in my life. The waves and the mountains seem to say, this too shall pass. You're not that important. I will be here long after you are gone. I was here long before you ever existed. I have something to teach you. The earth isn't here for me. It isn't here for my needs, and it constantly puts my one small life in perspective. So how can I but say thank you? How can any of us do our part to say thank you and do our part to try to save it? Thank you.
Shana, I have to let a few seconds go by to take all that in before I can speak. It was wonderful. I know this is going to be recorded, and I know I'm going to be listening to this homily again. very fine one of your best, I think. Thank you so much for that. The next person I'd like to introduce is Jacklyn Barrs. Jacklyn is a kind of a straight ahead person, a hardworking person who is looking in her way, looking after the earth, putting in the time, putting in the work. I would describe her as a field hardened marine technician and researcher. She could make herself useful in just about any outdoor field project. Jacklyn is an ecosystem restoration specialist with World Wildlife Federation Canada, an organization she represents in the Saanich Peninsula Environmental Coalition. She exhibits a commitment to its goals and willingness to do the necessary work. We believe there's a direct connection between feeling that the Saanich Peninsula is our proper home and the work of dedicated people like Jacklyn. Over to you, Jacklyn.
Thank you very much, Farrell and Shana and Tiffany, for your guys' amazing words thus far in the evening. So I feel like I'm going to be bringing it back down because I'm going to be focusing more on the scientific side of the Saanich Peninsula. And the very unique thing about the Saanich Peninsula is that it is part of the coastal Douglas fir biogeoclimatic zone. And of course, Farrell has mentioned bioregion from some of his work that he's done on the top. And the big thing to think about this zone is that it only makes up 0.3% of British Columbia. So this is very, very small. And it's one of the rarest in the 16 ecological zones that exist in British Columbia. And it has some of the highest biodiversity, especially amongst the plants. And we get a wide variety of overwintering bird species, which is probably why around the Saanich Peninsula and even down in the greater Victoria region, there is 3 migratory bird sanctuaries. And of course, this is being put on by Shoal Harbour, which is one of the migratory bird sanctuaries that exists in the Saanich Peninsula. But a lot of my work tends to focus in around the conservation of coastal habitats. And of course, you have to think, the Saanich Peninsula has about 45 kilometers of shoreline and is made up of 3 distinct kind of municipalities that exist around this coastline. And it really does extend into what Tiffany says, it's part of the ocean, the saltwater. And there's a wide variety of habitats that make up these shorelines. And a lot of these shorelines are made up by these very distinct coastal processes that exist. So these coastal processes are wave actions, tidal water movements, and also, of course, systems of fresh water moving out into the ocean that creates these unique salt marshes. And of course, the Roberts Bay area has one of those distinct habitats, a salt marsh that exists coming out from Mermaid Creek, as well as this beautiful sand and gravel habitat that it was developed and created by the erosion of the shorelines. But what's beginning to happen around the coastal Douglas fir bioregions is there's a large amount of humans that are existing in it. And we are beginning to alter and change the shape of the habitats that are there and part of the homes for a wide variety of species. So not only plants, not only birds, but of course, the marine creatures that tend to use these sand and gravel beaches. And we're beginning to disrupt these habitats. And some of the most unique species that use, these sand and gravel beaches are these small forage fish, Pacific sandlance and surf smelt that are incredibly important, and they actually support a wide range of ocean predators. So they are very much important of moving and transferring a lot of energy out into the ocean species. So the big thing is we're beginning to see changes as people are worried and concerned as sea levels are rising and beginning to encroach. They're beginning to think about, how do I protect my properties? So they are hard armoring, they're building riprap walls and they are changing those natural coastal processes that exist, that develop and create these sand and gravel beaches that, of course, we actually enjoy walking on. And what's beginning to happen when you have these hard armored shorelines is we are changing the way the beach looks. The beaches are becoming shorter, coarser, and harder, and thus we are changing the habitat for the fish that use this area. And so, of course, they're no longer able to glue their eggs, and we are beginning to lose that connection into the ocean. And these fish have been identified by researchers at the Juanes lab, to make up a good portion of Chinook salmon diet, especially the Pacific salmon in around this Harrow Strait, so right here in our backyard. And of course, in this region, of course, we have the southern resident killer whales that feed on the Chinook salmon. So we are just through our modifications and our changes to our home, to the areas that we're living in, and to some of the reasons we're drawn to this beautiful space, we are impacting the marine food webs that exist out there, and we are potentially even threatening the species that exist out there and those that are iconic to British Columbia, because of course everything is circular and connected through these ecosystems. And so we have to think about ways of conserving and protecting and restoring natural coastal processes that are quite vital. And what's been very unique is there's been many groups of individuals who've been going out and really working to identify where this habitat exists for surf, smelts, and sandlands. And there are numerous beaches in around the Sydney area and the North Saanich region that actually provide this type of habitat. But of course, a lot of the responsibilities for this is on the humans who steward the beach land in front of it, and whether they decide that they're going to put up something hard, change the coastal processes, and thus potentially, have loss to the habitats there. So there is some very important reasons as to why we need to think about the types of policies, the types of things that are being done for conservation, and how do we conserve that which is in our backyard, that blue ocean, that salt water that Tiffany has mentioned, that is part of their people, but it's also really part of the iconic piece of British Columbia, and feeds into those iconic species that BC is known for, and we identify as part of our home and where we are living. And I really think I'm just going to go with that short, concise way of speaking to this area, but it's very important to think about how we are conserving the 45 kilometers in around the Saanich Peninsula.
Thank you, Jacklyn. That was a very good example, of why we an important component of our home, and why, if we had the proper respect for our home and love for it, we would want to act in the right direction. I'm a forage fisher too. I've been out there quite a few times, and I've enjoyed that. And I have to say, I can see the impact of these armored beaches where I turn, and I can tell now which beaches are going to give up some eggs and which beaches are unlikely not to. So I don't want to see any more seawalls be built if I can help it. So thank you. That was brought us home of a very practical matter that we need to consider, but it is quite within the bounds of what we're talking about this evening. So thank you very much for that. We have one final speaker here, and that's Tiffany, who spoke earlier. The First Nations welcome. Tiffany is a well-respected language and culture revitalist apprentice for the Saanich First Nation. We thank Stephanie for stepping in to help us because Adam Olson, our original speaker, was unable to attend. Tiffany represents the Saanich Leadership Council on the Saanich Peninsula Environmental Coalition, and Jacklyn's involved in that, and so is Friends of Shoal Harbour. And her advice and wisdom is most appreciated. We've asked Tiffany to talk about how reconciliation with First Nations people could be approached in these difficult times. It might be easier if we all shared similar concept of home. I'm just asking. So, Tiffany, we're looking forward to what you have to say.
Hi, Ska. Thank you, everybody, for your words so far. When I was thinking about some things to share after listening to everyone talk, it made me think of some of our stories. I talked about us being saltwater people, but our first ancestor is Slamoch, and Slamoch is rain. So that story comes from Sneedquell. Sneedquell is a place of blue grouse, and it's what you know as Todd Inlet Park. And so it was one night, one rainy night, Slamoch came down and he landed on the ground, and then he was awakened. We say All means to be to come to consciousness. He came to consciousness and was given the teachings from our creator Chaels of how to conduct himself on these lands. And so he was taught the important teaching of cleansing yourself in bathing, a ritualistic bathing, to strengthen your heart and strengthen your mind. And I've done many walks with children in Sneedquell. And I shared that teaching with them and shared the story with them about how he utilized the teaching of cleansing his spirit and his body ritualistically, and built a village in Sneedquell and raised his family there and taught them how to be here in this territory. And I asked children, like, what would you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? And a girl told me she wanted to be an art teacher. And I thought that was really interesting because a lot of times, people say, I want to be an artist. But she said, I want to be an art teacher. And I was like, what that tells me is that you love art and you want to share that with other people. I was like, so you would want to cleanse your spirit and your body so that you can stay out of the way of the ones that you're teaching. Give them the tools and the teachings they need, but where you're not trying to control their vision. So you would cleanse yourself to do that. And then another boy, he told me he wanted to be a police officer. And I almost felt like that was a little bit of a snarky remark at me as an Indigenous person. Like he knew what that meant. And I was like, oh, well, if you were to be a police officer, you would have to cleanse yourself to ensure you don't abuse your power over other people, that you're there to always bring peace among people in your community, and that you don't have to commit any harm to anybody. And he kind of was stunned that I answered in that way. Perhaps he was thinking that I wouldn't think that there was a good way to be a police officer. And I could see why he might think that with how the RCMP was formed. But that what that brought to me was how water, whether it's salt water or fresh water, is really important to our people. And it also made me think of the different birds who have stories to share with us, like or even just how our words describe their relationship or their behaviors, and different animals as well, like Tunnuksin. Tunnuksin is I believe the mallard duck, and that's called Tunnuksin because it's always putting its nose to the earth. The word for nose is Nguksin. Nguksin. So Tunnuksin. Tun means the earth, so it's putting its nose to the earth. SENÇOÞEN is a squirrel, and that it means busy mouth because of how they're always like moving their mouth and going like that, or how they're pretending to be busy but they're really watching you. And we have indicator birds like Huqualish. Huqualish is the Swainson's thrush, and Huqualish is an indicator that the berries are going to be ripened And it's our belief that she comes and she puts the colors on the berries, and we sing a song for her, and we say Nalquamiuk, make their heads red, Nalpahuuk, make their heads blonde, Nalkahiuk, make their heads black, for the salmon berries, thimbleberries, and strawberries and blackberries and salal berries. And we have a story of Chia, and Chia was a woman who lived her life being generous. She really loved to, I talked about those teachings that SENÇOİFEN taught his family, and it's in our teachings to talk to the plants or even sing to the plants. I think it was really emphasized to sing to the plants, though. So I imagine Chia singing to the plants and having a prayer in her heart of how she's going to gather so much food to be able to share with the people. And because she worked so diligently and so prayerfully, the Creator transformed her. He took the color of the berries, the blueberries that she liked to harvest, and used that to transform her into the Steller's jay. And the Steller's jay is a bird that is always within our territory. It's out and about in the spring. We can see them and they come closer to our homes, but in the colder months they go up into the mountains, but they're always here. And my cousin Saanich has drawn depictions of that with the different seasons, and there's always a Steller's jay. In each of the seasons he has a Steller's jay depicted in his interpretation of the seasons. And the story I mentioned earlier of our flood story, another artist, John Eliot, he depicted Saanich, the rebirth of our territory, by drawing a baby in its fetal position and its backside facing up, because Saint means to rise up, and Uch is a suffix that refers to the backside. So it's not only is that are we emerging people, but it's depicting the rebirth of a baby in a fetal position with its backside up. And so our language has so much descriptiveness to it, so much poetry, and ways to help us visualize the things that happened, to help us remember who we are as Saanich peoples and how to care for the land and how to conduct ourselves. There's stones all throughout the Saanich Peninsula that are also teachers to us. Each of the islands that I talked about are teachers to us of how to be good mothers and fathers, of how not to be too strongly attached to our children. We're here to love and care and nurture our children, but we're not coming back to that story about what I was saying to the little girl who wanted to be an art teacher. As parents, we're not here to control and own our children. We have to create space for them to be the beautiful person that they are meant to be and share their gifts. And we can't impose ourselves on them. And so when I think of home, I think of all those stories, and I think of how each plant and animal and stone and even the winds are relatives. We say shwakwa or shwalakwa. We call them our relatives, and in my work, I've worked with my community helping reframe language as much as we can, the English language, to talk about our plant relatives as relatives. So if you go to Saanich Park, which is a campground that its name has been reclaimed, you'll see the work that I did with people in my community, where these plants are talking as if they're people talking about themselves, rather than us talking about them as objects that can be used this way or that way. These plants are providers to us. And you know, when we talk to the plants and we pray to the plants and we ask for their support, we ask for their help to stångjucht, to medicate us in some way. And the way I like to teach that most importantly is that you don't have to ingest it. You don't have to pick it to receive that medicine. And you know, science shows us that with people's new awareness of forest bathing and different microbiome that you might find in soil or on leaves, or just breathing things in. But we can't deny the spiritual connection of being able to literally talk to a plant and let it get to know you. You know, people talk about, to tell me when I have this conversation with certain people of like me getting to know the plant, I'm like, I want them to get to know me so that I feel like a safe presence when I'm around them. But that's all I'll share for now, because my daughter walked in and it's probably a sign I need to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tiffany. That was beautiful. That put me in mind of two-eyed seeing. Those of us who are not used to that idea should maybe adopt it, because then we could hold your stories along with the others that we know, and it would be a much, much richer combination. So we're really grateful to you for sharing that. Beautiful stories, and it's wonderful. So that brings us to the end of the sort of formal part of this this evening. And now I turn it over to Rick, who is sort of the moderator and the kind of the keeper of the keys and keeping an eye on the time. I hope we have some time for some questions and some comments. And we have some prepared a way for people to, if they wish to offer extended comments in writing via email. We have a special email address that you can send them to, but we're really welcoming your feelings, your comments, your concerns about what you've heard this evening and what you make of it. So I open it for discussion with Rick will moderate.
Rick, you're on mute.
You're muted, Rick.
Too funny, too funny. So just let me remind you and myself to take the mute off, okay? So you can ask a question. As Farrell indicated, there's at least 3 ways you can let me know that you got a question. 1, just wave your hand, pardon me. 2, down at the very bottom, there's of your screen, you should see an icon that you hover over that says reactions. On that, you'll see the big yellow bar that says raise hand. And so I'll see a hand icon. Just remember to take your hand down. And then, of course, there's the chat function. So feel free if you have an extended question, for example, or whatever, you can put it into the chat function. So, Farrell.
Yeah, didn't we say, Rick, that if anybody wanted to have take a more extended outpouring via chat, we would keep the chat box open for a time after the seminar's over. People could contribute.
Yes.
Put a pretty picture up there, and you can type away.
Yeah, I don't have a pretty picture to put up. So in any event, at the end, we'll certainly give you folks some time if you still have something that you want to contribute through the chat box. We won't rush you off. All right, so first question. Do we have a question from anybody or a comment?
Well, I've never been one to be shy. It's Bob. I thought tonight was really profound. It was really, really excellent. And, one thing I was thinking is we're talking about love. And, I've certainly, and just getting comfortable, loving where you live. And Rick and I did a little thing back and forth on chat because a very good friend of ours has passed away now, wrote a book in 1990 called Home Place. And it's essays on the ecology of being at home. And, that's been a kind of one of my little Bibles in my pocket for a long, long time. So thinking about where you are as home is something that's, something that I've always done. And Stan Rowe was this chap's name, and he believed everyone had a home place. There's some place on the earth where your heart rings differently than it does any place else. And some people are fortunate to find that home place, and some people never find it. Some people find that home place and refuse to accept it. But I know personally, first time I drove into Swift Current, Saskatchewan, I was home. My heart rang. It was just so different. And my home place is, much as I love living here, my home place is Southwest Saskatchewan. And so, everyone's got a home place. And the other thing I was thinking is that you're talking about sharing your love. I've spent my life sharing my love. And that's the main thing that kind of drives me, is sharing my love for the land and wanting to have the land there forever. And Shana, you were saying that it's the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees that will be around. Humans may not be, but and one thing that gives me comfort is you look up and the clouds are there. You walk the beach, the waves go in and out, and that's just going to continuously happen, and that's really reassuring. So my question is I'd like each of you to comment on the word health. And what you hear a lot is how important the connection is between human health and environmental health. And that's completely off the radar. Here we are in British Columbia. The province just had a throne speech. Province just put out an economic statement. The province just had their finance, so just had their budget speech. Nothing in there about biodiversity, nature, that kind of thing at all. And it's just so profound. And people need to realize that the environmental health and human health are fundamentally connected. And I'd just be curious to have the three of you comment on that word health.
Okay, Bob, I'm with you there. Am I on the air?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Some time ago, I was chair of the North Saanich Parks Commission, and we spent our time there working up sort of a master parks plan, recommendations, some of which have actually come to place, the improvement of the Scoter Trail, cycling lanes, and so on. But one of the things we emphasized was, in fact, a connection between human health and the existence of the parks, the soothing aspect of walking a wooded trail, a beach, and so on. And we felt that was a very good reason for investing in maintaining and investing further in our parks and natural spaces. And I think that parks plan is buried somewhere in the files. I may even have a copy of it. We worked on it really hard. Some things have happened, some things have not. But thank you for bringing that up, Bob, because I think it's a really important part of the discussion.
Tiffany said she's grabbing water. Jacklyn, do you want to go next? I have a feeling you have something you might want to say.
Yeah, I guess I can go next. I think we really need to think about, the health of I'm actually going to go with water, because this is kind of a very profound thing. We need healthy watersheds. Humans need to drink water. We don't survive. Like, that's the reality of human beings. We do not survive without water. And we have to think that, we need healthy water to support us, and we need our watersheds to be healthy. We need to have distinctive, really healthy riparian zones that help to filter away some of the pollutants that are coming from the air that rain into that area, that then filter into some of the streams. And so, without having healthy ecosystems that haven't been degraded, we have that potential of having poisonous water streaming into the systems that we are going to be drinking. And this is what's also being experienced by creatures who are having to deal with stormwater systems, runoffs that go onto beaches. We are pushing out pollutants into these habitats and such. And there's been a very unique study that has happened, down in the States, that actually showcased that from car tires, the rubber breaking up onto the roadways and then being washed into urban streams that were habitat for salmon was resulting in the death of small juvenile, I believe it was coho fry right away. It was pretty much immediate death. And it was an actual thing that started to biologically change them. So it's thinking about, how do we put in healthy buffers and things, so that the ecosystems maintain healthiness, and then even humans that have the potential of drinking and we could be potentially polluted by these types of systems, because they can filter into our watersheds and those types of things. So we need to have healthy ecosystems, not only for ourselves, the ability to be able to drink and live, and we need to be able to, think about those healthy habitats. And human encroachment has begun this process of degradation that's becoming quite significant.
I would just say that I was really struck, Bob, by the all-encompassing nature of the way you used the word health, and how many words in our language we kind of have pigeonholed into a very small meaning. And it was reminding me of phrases that when I first heard them made no sense to me, like environmental racism. But then when I thought about it and learned about it more, it actually made sense, that you can be racist in the way you treat the environment, right? And that in health, you can kind of pigeonhole it into, it's just about a human being going to the doctor. But actually, health is about so much more than that. And if we haven't learned that throughout this pandemic, I don't know when we are going to learn that, frankly, right? And I was really moved by Tiffany's description of introducing oneself to a plant, having a different kind of healthy relationship with the earth could take on a whole new meaning if you think of it at that level, as opposed to health is just a one-to-one transaction. I think it's the way that our capitalist culture has us thinking, in ways that are very individualistic, in ways that are very transactional, in ways that are very much, what's in it for me, and less about the health of whom, of what, that it's not just about human beings and our individual health, but the health of the whole. The health of us all. It's like the phrase commonwealth as well, right? That's another phrase that got, what's this commonwealth thing? Oh, you're actually, that the intent of that was something quite different. So I'm just musing on that word and how broad the meaning can be, and I'm really struck by that.
When I was working with the Saanich Leadership Council, we were working on community engagement, and it was about health, and the land, and Shauna Johnson did a lot of work with our elders about our laws to help guide us in making decisions. And the terms that they gave us was sli, which means love, Llylog, which means interconnectedness, Etal, which means respect for the rights of others, Atlantis, which is reciprocity, and Aitshquelaquin and Stewill. So that means good thoughts and feelings or good intentions and prayer. And you know, our ways of being help us understand that, you know, I talked about how the land has all these stories for us to be good people, and each mountain was placed in our territory to protect us, and each island was placed to protect us, but the reciprocity is inherent, so we have to care for those places too. When we go and dig for shellfish, we're keeping them alive and well. When we don't dig for shellfish, they turn black. And when we dig for camas, we loosen up the soil to allow them to grow bigger. We dig up the big ones, and then if they're too small, we put them back. And when you dig up camas, if you've ever dealt with camas, you know that it's a bulb that produces bulblets. So not only when you go and dig for those big bulbs, you see there's little bulbs that are producing, and then you just replant them. And you know, our territory requires some work. You know, we're not like other places that have 10 feet of, I think you call it loam soil, right? Like that soil that Western agriculture like really desires, where we've got the clay soil that requires you to put in some work, but yet you know, Jacklyn spoke to what we know is that there was an immense amount of biodiversity within the Garryoak ecosystem, coastal Douglas fir ecosystem, and within our waterways. And so when I think of health, I think about, you know, what Canada and the churches did to our children by starving them, conducting nutrition experiments on them to see how malnourished can you be as a human being, and how little can you survive off of, and how do you renourish the body. And I think about how while that was going on, our land was being taken from under us, and the landscape was then changed. Before the land was stolen, there was a great amount of biodiversity such that nothing was hungry. You know, no person, no deer, no cougar, no bear, nothing was hungry. No being was hungry. We were able to care for the camas so that every human had enough, and enough to not only consume for themselves and their family, but to trade to other territories. It provided a solid place for Lekwungen women, as it's spoken to by Cheryl Bryce. That was their I guess you could say, authority over the land. That was where women held their standing in the nation economically and influentially. And there were so many butterflies that when they would die off, there'd be several inches of butterflies just floating on the beaches because it was so plentiful. The camas was so plentiful that it looked like an ocean. That's what one of the first settlers thought they saw. They walked up to this meadow and they thought they were appearing upon the water, but it was blue camas flowers in bloom. And our cedars were ancient and massive, and we actually kept it from encroaching on those meadowlands, because those meadows that we cared for was full of camas, but it was also great habitat for different birds to be able to live within. And it also attracted the SENÜOFEN. It attracted the SENÜOFEN, the deer, to come and eat. So that allowed us to hunt for them quite easily. And we didn't have to kill off wolves and cougars to be able to live here comfortably. We recognized we share this place with them, and so we had to respect them. And so maintaining a good balance of the meadows and the forests allowed the cougars to have privacy, so they wouldn't have to come into our space as much as they do these days. And so when I think of health, I think about how things like diabetes and heart disease and unique diseases like to our kidneys, because we can't eat as much shellfish as we used to, and seafood as we used to. And the way we took care of the land, we had really, according to the explorers, we were very beautiful people with beautiful skin and beautiful hair. I think those guys are a little lonely. They were a little caught up in how beautiful we were. Nonetheless, we were. Hair was really shiny because we had high protein diets through the fish, and good quality fats. And we did have ways to like clean our teeth, brush our teeth, and we had soap berries to cleanse our skin. And all of that came from how we cultivated the land and respected the land, and everyone was well taken care of. And so I think if we can recognize that when we care for the land, it cares for us, we need to deepen our understanding of that.
Thank you, Tiffany.
I actually think I'm going to cut in a little bit about what Tiffany kind of talked about there, like that caring or that conserving of the land, and the fact that it would take care of us. And one of the really unique factors about it is, of course, like Tiffany's been talking about, the fact that they're unable to, consume the shellfish that they have had, because of course we've had that impact by pollution and those types of pieces. And we've also disrupted certain systems that, provide nursery type habitat. And that would be, of course, eelgrass beds that would provide, habitat for the fish that are born in there, and also habitat for salmon when they come out of the systems. But these systems are also providing care for us. Eelgrass beds are known for absorbing carbon that we've been pumping out into the atmosphere. They're an actual habitat that is providing solutions to some of the effects that humans have been doing. And as well, we need to make sure that we are, improving the water quality that is going in, so that these habitats can help, conserve us as we are feeling and experiencing climate change. I mean, especially last summer with the temperatures increasing substantially, the heat waves that we experienced, the loss of quite a bit of marine coastal life that exists on our coastline. But the big thing about it is another thing for us, and the reasons we should be stewarding and taking care of these kelp beds or these eelgrass beds and such is, yes, they're helping us sequester carbon, but at the same time, what they end up doing as a plant as well is they start to improve water quality. And this means that the shellfish that, the Saanich people are reliant on, will actually become better and can be consumed. And I think that's very important. And so we need to think about how we're managing, systems that are going into the ocean and potentially affecting the health of those habitats.
Jacklyn.
Farrell?
Rick, are you there? Rick, are you there?
Yeah. So Bob and then Shana.
Right.
Where'd Bob
I
go?
I was just waving to Bob because he wrote to us that he had to leave in the chat, so I was waving goodbye to Bob.
Oh yeah, I have run.
And
That's right.
he's gone now.
Missed it. Yeah, yeah. He's gone. We lost Bob.
Okay. Well, it's been quiet for a time. Are we, what do you think? We should call it a day and leave a little time for people to write if they wish? What's your feeling, Rick?
I would say so, yes. So I would say that you can give us your salient and insightful closing remarks that sum all this up beautifully and eloquently. No pressure.
Yes, sir. No pressure. No. This, I have to say, this evening has been rich beyond my expectations. And I'd like to thank everybody, people for attending. I'd like to thank our guest speakers, Reverend Shana, Tiffany, Jacklyn, for excellent presentations. I'd like to thank you, Rick, for helping put this thing together. I think that I'm coming away with 3 H's, I think, sums this up. One would be health, home, and hope. So I don't know, it's got an aphorism that I find sustaining. I think it's been wonderful. And I thank everybody for their participation. This was hard work, but this was a lot of fun. And let's do it again sometime. Okay, over to you, Rick.
All right. Good night, all. Thank you very, very much for coming out. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.